The great crystal ship, the Starlight Sorrow, hung in the silent black of space. It was a city made of glass and light, the flagship of the Valen Empire. Inside, the air was perfect. It was a mix made by machines designed to be pleasant for many different species. It smelled of nothing and everything all at once. A little sweet, a little clean, like a room that had been cleaned too well. Princess Lyra stood at the center of a vast room. The floor was so clear she could see stars below her feet. She wore robes of silver silk that moved like liquid. Her skin, a soft lavender color, seemed to glow. Her long white hair was piled high on her head. She held a glass of shimmering blue liquid. She did not drink it. It was a prop, a part of the picture. This was the Unity Gala. It was a party to welcome the newest species to the galactic community. Humans. Lyra had been meeting them all evening. They were interesting. They were louder than the Valen. Their laughter was a sharp sound. Their handshakes were firm. They looked you directly in the eyes, which her people found strangely aggressive. They were primitive, everyone said, but they were also fierce. They had earned their place here through sheer will. Lyra moved through the crowd. Her smile was a practiced curve of her lips. It did not reach her eyes. She nodded at a tall being from the Greel Confederacy. She exchanged a silent, respectful bow with a diplomat from the Crystalline Union. It was all the same. The same polite words. The same empty smiles. The same sterile, filtered air. Then she passed a tighter group of humans. They were listening to their commander, a woman named Hana, speak. As Lyra glided by them, a scent cut through the artificial perfumes of the gala. It was a ghost of a smell, but it was sharp. It was the smell of sun hitting dry ground. It was the smell of the air after a lightning strike. It was the smell of something clean like rain, but also something wild, like a deep forest. It was a scent that was alive. It was completely, utterly out of place in this sterile room, and it was familiar. The memory did not come back to her slowly. It slammed into her. It was a physical force. Her body went rigid. Her fingers holding the delicate glass tightened. A small, dangerous crack appeared on its surface. The practiced smile vanished from her face, replaced by a blank mask of shock. The noise of the gala, the music, the chatter, the clinking of glasses faded into a dull roar in her ears. All she could sense was that smell pulling her back through 10 years of polished life, into a time of terror and fire. Her heart, a quiet, steady drum in her chest, began to beat a frantic, panicked rhythm. It was a feeling so strong it made her dizzy. She could not move. She could not breathe. She was frozen. "Your Highness?" A voice, soft and worried, came from her side. It was her attendant, Mira. Mira's large dark eyes were wide with concern. She gently touched Lyra's arm. "Your Highness? Are you unwell? You have gone pale." Lyra blinked. The bright lights of the gala room came back into focus, but they seemed too harsh. She could feel the eyes of the guests starting to turn towards her. A Valen princess did not freeze. A Valen princess did not show distress. It was against all their training. She forced her fingers to relax. She handed the cracked glass to Mira, her movement stiff. "It is nothing, Mira," she whispered, her voice tight. "A sudden pain in my head. I must retire." Mira, ever efficient, nodded. She knew it was more than a headache. She had seen the look in Lyra's eyes, a look of pure animal fear. "Of course, Your Highness. Let me assist you." Leaning slightly on Mira's arm, Lyra turned from the crowd. She offered a weak, apologetic smile to a nearby ambassador, who bowed in understanding. But inside, she was screaming. The scent was already fading, swept away by the ship's recycling systems, but the damage was done. The door to her private chambers hissed shut behind them, sealing out the noise of the party. The room was spacious and beautiful, with a view of a swirling nebula. It was her sanctuary. But now it felt like a cage. "Shall I call the physician?" Mira asked, her voice gentle. "No," Lyra said, her voice stronger now. She walked to the clear wall, staring out at the colorful gas clouds. "No, that will not be necessary. Leave me." Mira hesitated, but she had been trained to obey. She bowed. "As you wish, Your Highness." She left, and the room was silent. Alone, Lyra wrapped her arms around herself. The composure she had held onto for so long was gone. She was trembling. She closed her eyes, and she was there again. She was 10 years old. She was on a different ship, a smaller, faster royal shuttle. They were on a survey mission. Then alarms, blinding red lights, the shudder of explosions hitting the hull. Pirates. Her nanny had shoved her into a reinforced pod, her face a mask of terror. The crash was a nightmare of noise and force. She was thrown around like a doll. Then silence. The smell of burning, the sharp coppery smell of her own people's blood. She had been trapped. A piece of the console had pinned her leg. It did not hurt at first. She was too scared to feel pain. She remembered the smoke, thick and black, making her cough. She remembered the silence after the screams had ended. She was alone. She was sure she was going to die there in the dark on a strange and savage world. Then a sound, not the careful, precise steps of Valen rescuers. This was a different sound. A crunching, heavy sound, boots on broken metal. A figure emerged from the smoke. It was not tall and slender like her people. It was broader, covered in dark patterned fabric and hard plates. A helmet covered its face with a dark visor. A soldier, a human soldier. He moved quickly, but not with panic. He scanned the wreckage, his movements efficient. He saw her. He didn't speak. He didn't make reassuring sounds. He just came to her. He used a tool to cut away the debris pinning her. His strength was immense. He lifted the heavy piece of metal as if it were nothing. When he was done, he took off his helmet. He was young. His hair was dark and stuck to his forehead with sweat. His face was smudged with dirt and something darker. But his eyes, they were calm. They were focused. He looked at her trapped leg, and then back at her face. There was no pity in his gaze, only a determined kind of gentleness. He carefully lifted her from the wreckage. His grip was firm and secure. As he carried her away from the burning ship, his scent surrounded her. It was on his clothes, on his skin. It was the smell of the world outside, of wet soil, of crushed green plants, of his own sweat, and of that clean, wild air. It was not the sterile, safe smell of the ships and cities she knew. It was raw and real, and in that moment of utter terror, that smell became the smell of safety. It was the smell of the person who was saving her. He carried her to a clearing where other humans in similar uniforms were setting up a perimeter. He did not put her down. He stood holding her, a solid, unmoving rock in the chaos. He stayed until an older, stern-faced woman with short-cropped hair, Commander Hana, though Lyra did not know her name then, came and spoke to him. Only then did he gently pass her to a medic. Before he turned to leave, he looked back at her. He gave her a single slow nod. Then he put his helmet back on and disappeared into the smoky trees, becoming a ghost. Lyra opened her eyes. She was back in her chamber on the Starlight Sorrow. 10 years had passed. She was a princess of the most powerful empire in the sector, but she was breathing as hard as she had that day in the clearing, the humans at the gala. They were here, and one of them carried that scent. The scent of earth and ozone and salvation. The ghost was not in the trees anymore. He was on her ship. The memory took hold of her, pulling her down like a strong current. The smooth, cool walls of her chamber on the Starlight Sorrow dissolved. The quiet hum of the ship's systems became a different, more terrifying sound. It was the shrieking of tortured metal and the blaring of emergency sirens. She was 10 years old again. Her name was Lyra, but she was not a princess here. Here she was just a scared child. The small royal shuttle, the Silver Dart, shook violently. Her nanny, Alara, held her tightly in a cushioned seat. "Hold on, little light. Just hold on." Alara's voice was high with a fear Lyra had never heard before. The lights flickered, died, and were replaced by a harsh red glow. Outside the viewport, the green and blue marble of the planet Earth spun wildly. They were on a simple survey mission, a trip meant to be safe and educational. Then the pirates had come, ugly, brutish ships that had appeared from the shadow of the moon. They had fired without warning. The Silver Dart was fast, but it was not a warship. A blast had hit their engine. "Brace for impact," the pilot's voice screamed over the comms. It was the last thing Lyra heard before the world exploded. The sound was deafening. The ship tore through the atmosphere, screaming as it went. Lyra was thrown against her restraints. She saw Alara's head snap back. Then came a series of terrible crashes as the ship skipped across the ground like a stone, breaking apart with each impact. Finally, with a final groaning shudder, it stopped. Silence. Not a true silence, but a ringing one, filled with the creak of cooling metal and the hiss of escaping air. The smell was the first thing that registered. Sharp, acidic, the smell of burning wires, and underneath it a sweet, coppery smell she knew was the blood of her people. "Alara?" Lyra whispered. Her nanny was slumped in her seat, not moving. Ilara! Panic, cold and sharp, filled her. She struggled with the clasp of her safety harness. Her fingers were clumsy and shaking. Finally it released and she stumbled out of the seat. The floor was tilted at a crazy angle. She crawled over to Ilara, shaking her shoulder. There was no response. A sob caught in her throat. She was alone. She had to get out. She moved towards the emergency hatch, but a fallen support beam blocked the way. When she turned to find another path, a sharp, hot pain shot up her leg. She looked down. A piece of the console, sharp and twisted, had pinned her leg to the floor. She wasn't trapped by weight, but by the metal spearing through the fabric of her dress and into her flesh. She couldn't pull free. Tears streamed down her face. She cried out for help, but her voice was small and lost in the vast, wrecked silence of the ship. The lavender color of her blood slowly spread across the floor. She was going to die here. She was going to die on this dirty, primitive world, alone in the dark. Time lost all meaning. She drifted in and out of consciousness, each time waking to the same nightmare. The smoke began to thicken, making her cough. The only light came from the red emergency strips, casting everything in a hellish glow. Then she heard it. A sound, not the gentle hum of a Valen rescue craft. This was a heavy, crunching sound. The sound of boots stepping on broken glass and metal. It was a purposeful, steady sound. Someone was walking through the wreckage. A shadow fell over her. She looked up, her heart hammering against her ribs. A figure stood there, silhouetted against the broken hull. It was broad and bulky, covered in dark green and brown fabric and hard matte black plates. It was not a Valen form. It was shorter, stockier. A helmet covered its head, with a dark reflective visor that showed her nothing but her own terrified, tiny reflection. This was not a rescuer. This was a monster from this world. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the end. But the end did not come. Instead, she heard a low, calm voice. It spoke words she did not understand. The tone was not threatening, it was steadying. She dared to open her eyes. The figure was closer now, kneeling before her. It moved its hands not towards a weapon, but towards the piece of metal that pinned her. It pointed at the metal, then at her, and made a lifting motion with its hands. It was trying to communicate. She gave a small, terrified nod. The soldier, she understood now it was a soldier, did not rush. He examined the situation. He saw how the metal had pierced her leg. He pulled a tool from his belt. It was a heavy, powerful-looking cutter. He positioned it carefully. He looked at her, pointed at the tool, and then covered his own ears with his hands. Lyra understood. She covered her ears. There was a loud, sharp crack as the metal was severed. The vibration shot through her leg, and she cried out from the fresh wave of pain. But she was free. The soldier put the tool away. Then with immense care he slid his gloved hands under her. One arm went under her back, the other under her knees, carefully avoiding her injured leg. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing. His hold was firm, secure. She was not a princess here. She was a child who needed help. He carried her out of the wrecked shuttle. The outside light was blinding after the darkness. She blinked, her eyes watering. The air hit her next. It was unlike anything she had ever breathed. It was thick, full of smells. The damp smell of soil, the rich scent of crushed grass and leaves, the clean smell of recent rain. It was wild and untamed and alive, and she could smell him, this close with her face near the collar of his uniform. His scent mixed with the world's. It was the smell of sun on fabric, of dried sweat, of something clean like soap, and something else, something uniquely him, a warm human smell. It was not the sterile, filtered air of her ship. It was raw and real. And in her terror, this solid, strong person and his anchoring smell became her only safe point in the universe. He carried her to a small clearing where other soldiers were moving quickly. They spoke in short, sharp words she didn't understand. One of them, a woman with a kind face, started to come towards them with a medical kit. But the soldier who carried her, June, did not put her down. He stood rock-still holding her, while the others secured the area. He was her shield. Another soldier, a woman with a stern face and short cropped hair, walked up. She looked at Lyra, then at June. She spoke a single word. Hana! Lyra would later learn this was the commander's name. June nodded. Only then did he move. He walked over to the medic and with the same gentle care, transferred Lyra into her care. As the medic began to look at her leg, Lyra kept her eyes on June. He stood for a moment, looking back at her. His face was young, but his eyes were old. They were brown, and in the daylight she could see the exhaustion in them, but also a deep, quiet strength. He gave her a single, slow nod. It was a simple gesture, but it held a world of meaning. "You are safe now. You are going to be okay." Then he turned. He put his helmet back on, becoming the anonymous soldier once more. He picked up his weapon and walked back towards the smoking wreckage, disappearing into the trees without a backward glance. Lyra was loaded onto a different, smaller human craft. As the doors closed, she took one last deep breath of the wild, earthy air, filled with his scent. It was the last thing she remembered before the human medics gave her something that made her sleep. Back in her chamber on the Starlight Sorrow, Princess Lyra let out a shaky breath. The memory faded, leaving her feeling hollow and exposed. The ghost was not just a memory. He was here, and she had to find him. The smooth, cool surface of the viewport felt real against her forehead. Princess Lyra pressed against it, trying to use the solidity of the ship to steady the whirlwind inside her. The colorful nebula outside was a blur. She was not seeing the present. She was still trapped in the past, in the smoke and the smell of Earth. The memory was no longer a hidden thing. It was alive. It was vivid and sharp. She could feel the ghost of the pain in her leg. She could feel the secure strength of the soldier's arms around her. Most of all, she could still smell him. That scent had been a key, unlocking a door she had sealed shut a long time ago. She had to be sure. She had to know if it was real, or if her mind was playing a cruel trick on her. Straightening up, she walked to the smooth, dark panel on her wall. With a wave of her hand, it glowed to life. This was her private terminal with access to the ship's main database. She had privileges far beyond most of the crew. She could find information. She could find him. Her fingers moved over the glowing symbols. She pulled up the manifest for the human delegation. The list was long. There were diplomats, scientists, cultural attachés, and their support staff. She scanned the names. They were all human names, strange to her eyes. She saw the name Hana and her breath hitched. The stern-faced commander? She was here, leading the human group, but Lyra was not looking for Commander Hana. She searched for the human military personnel attached to the delegation for security. Their files were more restricted, but her royal access cut through the digital locks. There were profiles for a dozen soldiers. She looked at their pictures. Serious faces, men and women, all in uniform. None of them were the young man from her memory. These faces were harder, older in a different way. A cold doubt began to creep into her heart. Had she imagined it? Had the stress of the gala and the strange human smells created a false memory? It was possible. The mind did such things to protect itself, but that scent, it had been so specific, so real. She leaned back, closing her eyes, trying to think. He was a soldier, a ground soldier. He had been on Earth in that specific region 10 years ago. The human military was vast, but their records were thorough. The Valen had insisted on deep background checks for all humans coming aboard their ships. She opened a new search. She input the parameters. Human ground forces assigned to the Korean Peninsula Earth approximately 10 years ago. The database processed the request. It was a broad search, and it returned hundreds of names. This was hopeless. She needed another way. Then she remembered something else. A detail from the crash. After she had been rescued, after the humans had handed her over to the Valen recovery team, there had been a report. A brief, formal summary of the event. The Valen authorities had taken it from the humans. She had never read it. She had never wanted to, but it would be in the archives. She searched for it now. Valen Shuttle Silver Dart Incident Report Earth. The file appeared. It was marked with high-level security clearance, but her identity bypassed it. She opened it. It was a cold clinical document. It listed the date, the coordinates of the crash, the suspected pirate group responsible. It listed the casualties. She saw Ilara's name and looked away, a fresh pang of grief striking her. Then she saw the section titled Rescue and Recovery Personnel, Human. There were only a few names. The commander, Hana, a medic, and one other, a soldier noted for initial extraction and casualty evacuation. Her eyes dropped to the name, June. It was a simple name, short, easy to say. June. Her heart leaped into her throat. It was real. He was real. His name was June. With trembling fingers, she went back to the human delegation manifest. She searched for the name June. The system thought for a moment. Then it returned a result, one result, June, not a diplomat, not a scientist. His title was Chief Security Liaison. It was a fancy title for the person in charge of the human soldiers protecting their delegation. The person who worked directly with the Valen ship security. His profile picture loaded. Lyra's breath caught. It was him. He was older, of course. The softness of youth was gone from his face, replaced by sharp angles and firm lines. There were faint grooves at the corners of his eyes. His hair was still dark, but it was cut shorter, more severe. He was not looking at the camera. It was a candid shot, taken perhaps during a briefing. He was looking at something off to the side, his expression focused, thoughtful. It was the same expression he had worn when he was assessing the wreckage, figuring out how to free her. But the eyes, they were the same. They were calm. They were the same brown eyes that had looked at her, a terrified alien child, and shown not fear or wonder, but a simple, determined kindness. He was here, on this ship. The ghost was not in the trees anymore. He was in the room next door. He walked the same hallways. He breathed the same air. A wave of emotions crashed over her. Relief that she had not gone mad. Shock that he was truly here after all this time. And a deep, burning shame. For 10 years she had accepted the quiet narrative of her people. Humans were volatile. They were emotional. They were strong but unrefined. They lacked the calm control of the Valen. She had looked at the human delegates with a polite, distant superiority. They were a useful but lesser species, and the man who had embodied everything strong and good and compassionate in her darkest moment was one of them. The primitive human she had been conditioned to look down upon was the very same man whose strength had been her anchor. She stared at his picture for a long time. The memory of his scent was now mixed with the reality of his face. The two halves of her past had clicked together. The silent, strong soldier had a name. June. What was she supposed to do now? Walk up to him at the next formal dinner? Say, "Hello, do you remember me? The little lavender girl you pulled from a spaceship wreck?" It was impossible. It was undignified. But the thought of doing nothing, of letting him remain a ghost in the ship's database, was worse. He had saved her life. He had carried her to safety. He had given her that single reassuring nod. He deserved to know that the child he saved had lived. He deserved more than to be a forgotten line in a mission report. She had to see him. She had to talk to him. Not as Princess Lyra of the Valen Empire, but as the girl from the crash. She had to thank him. But how? She was a princess. Her every move was watched. A private meeting with the human chief of security would cause talk. It would raise questions she did not want to answer. She needed a place. A neutral ground. A place where a chance meeting could seem natural. She called up the ship's schematic. Her eyes scanned the common areas, the dining halls, the observation decks. Then she found it. The Arboretum, a garden maintained jointly by the humans and Valen. It had a section for earth plants. It was a quiet, peaceful place. He was a soldier, but his file said he had a background in survival and terrain. It was possible he would visit the part of the ship that felt most like home. A plan began to form in her mind. It was a risky plan. It went against all protocol. But for the first time in a long time, the picture of perfect, serene royalty felt like a cage she needed to break. She looked one more time at the picture of June, the man who smelled of earth and safety. "I found you," she whispered to the empty room. The air in the Arboretum was different. It was heavy and moist, filled with 100 different smells. It was not the clean, filtered air of the rest of the ship. Here life was allowed to be messy. The sound of water trickling over rocks filled the space. Large, broad-leafed plants from Valen reached for the artificial sun lamps, their leaves shimmering with soft light. In another section, strange crystalline flowers from a desert world stood perfectly still. But Lyra's feet carried her past all of them. She walked towards a smaller, more humble section marked with symbols for Earth. Here the plants were green, a simple, vibrant green. There was moss growing on dark, damp stones. There were small, tough-looking flowers with white petals. And there was a patch of simple grass. She had asked Mira to find out June's schedule. It had been wrong of her, an abuse of her power, but she had done it anyway. Mira had reported that the human security chief often visited the Arboretum in the hour after his shift ended. He came to this very section, so Lyra waited. She pretended to examine a Valen glow vine, but her heart was pounding. She felt like a child again, nervous and unsure. This was a terrible idea. What would she even say? He was a soldier. She was a princess. Their worlds did not mix like this. Then she heard the door hiss open. Her back stiffened. She didn't turn around, but she listened. The footsteps were not the light, graceful steps of a Valen. They were firm, solid, human steps. She risked a glance from the corner of her eye. It was him. June. He was out of his formal uniform, wearing simpler dark pants and a shirt. He looked more relaxed, but his posture was still straight, his movements economical. He walked directly to the patch of earth plants, just as Mira had said he would. He stood before the plot of moss and stone, his hands clasped behind his back. He just looked at it, a quiet, still figure in the bustling garden. This was her chance. Her mouth felt dry. She took a slow, deep breath, gathering her courage. Then she turned and walked towards him. She moved quietly, but he must have heard her. A soldier's instincts. He did not turn suddenly or aggressively. He just slowly turned his head, his calm brown eyes taking her in. He saw the silver robes, the white hair, the lavender skin. He saw the princess. He immediately straightened a little more. His face became a polite, neutral mask. He gave a small, respectful bow of his head. "Your Highness," he said. His voice was deeper than she remembered, but it had the same steady quality. Lyra stopped a few feet from him. She looked at the moss, then back at him. She had practiced the words. "This one has a strong scent," she said, speaking in careful galactic standard. "It reminds me of a place I once knew." June looked at the plants, then back at her. A faint, polite smile touched his lips. It did not reach his eyes. He was being professional. "It's called soil, Your Highness," he said. "And that's the smell of rain on stone. Simple things, simple things." The words hung in the air. To her people, they were not simple. They were primitive, wild, uncontrolled. But he said it with a kind of reverence. This was not working. He saw only the princess. The memory was hers alone. If she was going to do this, she had to break the wall between them. She had to abandon being Princess Lyra and become, for a moment, the girl from the crash. She turned to face him fully. She let her eyes meet his, and she let the practiced calm fall away from her face. She allowed him to see the uncertainty there. "The smoke was thick," she said, her voice softer now, almost a whisper. "And the metal of the ship was twisted." She saw his polite expression freeze. A slight confusion flickered in his eyes. "But there was no fear in your eyes," she continued, holding his gaze. She could feel her own heart beating wildly. Only focus. The change in him was instant. It was like watching a fortress wall crumble. His professional mask shattered. His eyes, which had been politely distant, widened. They searched her face, truly seeing her for the first time. They moved over her features, the lavender skin, the white hair, no longer seeing a strange alien princess, but looking for the child he had once carried. His breath caught. His mouth opened slightly. The color drained from his face. The memory was there, rising in his own eyes, vivid and shocking. For a long moment, he was silent. The only sound was the trickle of water in the garden. Then, his voice came out, rough with disbelief. "It was you." The words were barely a whisper, filled with awe that made Lyra's chest feel tight. She nodded, a single, slow movement. "It was me." He stared at her, utterly stunned. He shook his head slowly, as if trying to clear it. I never knew what happened. After the medevac took you." He trailed off, his eyes still roaming her face. "They just said you were important. They wouldn't tell us anything else." "I lived," Lyra said simply. "Because of you." He was silent again, processing the impossible. The little alien girl, covered in soot and blood, was now this elegant, powerful woman standing before him. The two images did not fit together. He looked down at the moss, then back at her. "Your leg?" he asked, the soldier in him coming back, checking on his casualty. "It healed perfectly," Lyra said. "There is no scar." She paused. "My name is Lyra." He nodded slowly. "June, he said, though she already knew. I know, she replied softly. They stood there in the quiet garden, the alien princess and the human soldier. The years and the titles and the empires that separated them seemed to fade away. In that moment, they were just two people connected by a single, powerful thread from the past. The ghost had been found, and he had a name, and he was real. The silence in the arboretum was a comfortable one. It was filled with the sounds of life, the water, the faint hum of the lights, the rustle of leaves. The formal distance between them had vanished. They were just Lyra and June now. Lyra looked at the patch of earth plants. They told us, she began, her voice hesitant. My people. They told us that humanity's strength was also its weakness. That you were chaotic, governed by emotions you could not control. She met his eyes. They said your rawness made you fragile. June listened. He didn't look offended. He looked thoughtful. He reached down and gently touched the moss with his fingertips. It is true, he said. We feel things. Deeply. Anger. Fear. Joy. He looked up at her. But we also feel compassion. And a need to protect. It is not a weakness to care for others. That is what I see now, Lyra said. I looked down on your people. I thought our control, our calm, was superior. But on that day, you were not chaotic. You were the only calm thing in my world. She paused, gathering her thoughts. You saved me not because you were ordered to. You did it because it was the right thing to do. That is a clarity my people have forgotten. We hide from strong feelings. You find strength within them. June gave a small, quiet smile. It was the first real smile she had seen from him. It softened the lines on his face. We try, he said. It is not always easy. He looked at her, his gaze direct. I thought about that day. Many times. I wondered if the little girl was okay. I am. Very glad to see that you are. And I am glad to be able to thank you, Lyra replied. I never did. I was too young, too scared. Thank you, June, for your strength, for your kindness. He nodded, accepting her thanks with a simple grace. You were very brave, he said. You did not cry when I cut the metal. You were very strong. His words warmed her. They stood for a while longer, not needing to speak. They looked at the simple plants from his world. Lyra took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the scent of soil and rain. It no longer smelled just of memory and rescue. It smelled of something new, of understanding. After a time, June spoke. My shift will start again soon, he said. I should go. Of course, Lyra said. He began to turn, then stopped. He looked back at her. The garden is quiet at this time most days, he said. It was not an invitation, it was just a statement of fact. But the meaning was clear. I know, Lyra said. I often walk here. He gave her another small nod, just like he had all those years ago. Then he turned and walked away, his footsteps quiet on the path. Lyra stayed in the garden for a long time after he left. The peace she felt was deeper than any she had known in the crystal halls of her own quarters. The ghost was gone. In his place was a man named June. A good man. Later, back in her chambers, she looked at the stars. The Unity Gala was still happening in another part of the ship. The empty words and polite smiles were continuing without her. She knew she would have to go back to that world. She was a princess and she had duties. But something had changed. She saw the humans differently now. She saw their laughter not as loud, but as joyful. She saw their firm handshakes not as aggressive, but as honest. She saw their direct gazes not as challenging, but as open. She understood now what the true strength of humanity was. It was not in their weapons or their ships. It was not in their technology. It was in their hearts. It was in the simple, powerful choice of a soldier to save a child he did not know. It was in the capacity to care deeply and fiercely for others. It was a strength that was both gentle and unbreakable. The story of humanity was not one of primitive chaos. It was a story of compassion and resilience. It was a fuck yeah, not for their power, but for their spirit. And she, Princess Lyra of the Valen Empire, would carry that truth with her. The memory of salvation was no longer a painful secret. It was a foundation. A new, more genuine alliance had been born in that garden, built not on politics, but on a shared past and the simple, earthy scent of hope.